right now, in this very moment, who controls your mind? Not in theory, actually right now. When someone criticizes you, do you choose how to feel? When your phone buzzes, do you choose whether to look? When circumstances shift, do you choose your response? Most of us have surrendered control without realizing it. We've become consumers of life, waiting for something to arrive that will make us happy. Good day at work, we feel good. Bad traffic, we feel stressed. Someone praises us, we feel worthy. Someone ignores us, we feel invisible. The pattern runs so deep we don't even see it as a choice. We check our phones first thing in the morning, needing that hit of validation. We scroll through others' lives, measuring our worth by comparison. We wait for the weekend to feel relief, for vacation to feel peace, for retirement to feel free. Always waiting, always depending on circumstances to change before we can be okay. We've been operating this way for so long that we don't think there's another way to function in the world. The steering wheel is right in front of us, but we've forgotten we can actually steer. If this resonates, share where you're listening from in the comments below. Get comfortable. Wrap yourself in something soft if you'd like. We're about to explore what happens when you take back what's always been yours. The things we think will save us come with a price we never see coming. There's a trend happening right now among ambitious professionals and entrepreneurs. People are paying $100,000, sometimes $200,000, just to have dinner with a successful millionaire. One meal, a few hours of conversation. They see it as an investment, and in some ways, it is. They're buying access to shortcuts, to wisdom earned through decades of trial and error, to the formula that took someone else years to figure out. They want the map, so they don't have to wander blindly through the territory. And there's nothing wrong with seeking guidance. The desire to learn from those who've walked the path before us is natural and intelligent. These dinners can genuinely provide value, practical strategies, business insights, connections that might take years to build on your own. But let's look at what they're actually getting. Best case scenario, and this is if everything works out perfectly, if you implement every piece of advice flawlessly, if the market cooperates, if luck is on your side, you achieve economic freedom for 20 or 30 years of your life. Maybe you build a successful business that generates passive income. Maybe you master the stock market's patterns well enough to secure your retirement. Maybe you create wealth that gives you options most people never have. The ability to say no to jobs you hate, to take time off when you need it, to help your children get started in life. That's the dream they're buying into. And it's not a foolish dream. Economic security matters. Having resources provides genuine relief from certain kinds of suffering. But wealth doesn't solve what it can't touch. Your body ages, regardless of your bank balance. Sickness arrives uninvited. whether you can afford the best doctors or not. Relationships end despite your ability to provide comfort and security. People you love die, and no amount of money negotiates with death. The ache of jealousy from others, the loneliness of success, the fear that comes with any diagnosis, these remain untouched by wealth. Most wealthy people, and this is something they rarely admit publicly, aren't actually happy. They have everything they thought they needed, and yet something essential remains missing. The goalposts keep moving. The first million was supposed to be enough, then 10 million, then 100 million, and somehow enough never arrives. And there are costs nobody mentions in those expensive dinners. The complexity multiplies with every asset. Properties need management companies. Businesses need oversight. Investments need monitoring. And each responsibility claims more mental space. You check portfolios before breakfast, worry about market fluctuations during meetings, make decisions based on tax efficiency rather than what actually matters to you. The lawsuits start coming. Someone slips on your rental property, and their lawyer sees an opportunity. A business partner feels cheated and files complaints. A former employee wants more severance. You spend money protecting money you already earned. Time in depositions, reliving conflicts you tried to prevent, energy on situations that feel like extortion but are cheaper than fighting. Trust becomes difficult. When someone is friendly, you wonder about their motives. When people offer help, you question what they want in return. Dating becomes complicated. Are they attracted to you or your lifestyle? Friendships strain under unspoken financial imbalances. You become guarded, suspicious, unable to relax into genuine connection because you've been burned by people who saw you as a resource rather than a person. And then there's the paradox of possessions owning you. The luxury car needs specific mechanics and climate-controlled storage. The vacation home generates bills even when empty. Utilities, insurance, property taxes, landscaping, security systems that monitor a place you're too busy to visit. The art collection requires climate control, insurance riders, security consultants. You bought these things to enjoy, but they claim your attention and time more than you claim them. Buddhist teaching points to something we'd rather not acknowledge. Everything put together eventually comes apart. The business you spent decades building can fail when markets shift. The investment strategy that worked for 20 years becomes obsolete when technology disrupts entire industries overnight. The body you trained eventually protests. The runner's knees give out. The executive's heart reveals accumulated stress. Not as punishment, but because this is how conditioned things work. Understanding this isn't pessimism. It's seeing clearly what external solutions can and cannot provide. There's an ancient story that illustrates this perfectly. King Pasenadi ruled a prosperous kingdom in northern India during the Buddha's time. He had everything: wealth beyond measure, power over vast territories, respect from neighboring kingdoms, a palace filled with luxuries most people couldn't imagine. Every meal was a feast prepared by the finest cooks. Musicians performed for his entertainment. Servants attended to his every need. He could have anything the moment he desired it. And King Pasenadi loved to eat. He would consume enormous quantities at every meal, plates piled high with delicacies, servants bringing more dishes before he'd finished the previous ones. He ate past fullness, past satisfaction, simply because the food was there and tasted good, and he had the power to have as much as he wanted. Over time, the king grew obese. His body became heavy. His breathing labored. He needed help standing from his seat. Walking any distance left him exhausted. Sleep became difficult, as his breathing would sometimes stop entirely until he jolted, awake, gasping. But even experiencing this suffering directly every single day, he couldn't stop. The next meal would arrive, and he would eat the same way again, caught in a pattern he couldn't break, despite having all the willpower required to rule a kingdom. One day, after a particularly heavy meal, the king visited the Buddha. He sat down to listen to a teaching on moderation and mindfulness, and then fell asleep right there, still sitting up, unable to keep his eyes open from the weight of what he'd consumed. The Buddha looked at him with compassion. Here was a man who had everything the world says you need to be happy, and yet he sat there trapped in his own body, by his own choices, unable even to stay awake. When the king woke up embarrassed, the Buddha didn't lecture or shame him. Instead, he offered something simple, a short verse the king could remember during meals. When a person is always mindful, knowing moderation in the food they eat, their suffering decreases, they age slowly, and they protect their life. The Buddha asked a young attendant named Sudarsana to memorize this verse and recite it to the king at the beginning of every meal. King Pasenadi agreed to try. Every time he sat down to eat, young Sudarsana would stand nearby and recite the verse. At first it made little difference. The king would hear the words, nod politely, then eat exactly as he always had, the familiar pattern, too strong to interrupt with mere words. But gradually, hearing the same reminder every single day, something began to shift. He started to pause before automatically reaching for another serving. He began noticing the exact moment when his body had enough, even though his mind wanted more. He practiced putting down his fork when satisfied rather than stuffed, which at first felt almost painful, like denying himself something he deserved. Slowly, over many months, the king lost weight. His body became lighter, more mobile. He could move easily, breathe deeply, think clearly. Sleep came naturally again. He could walk through his palace gardens without exhaustion, climb stairs without needing to stop and rest. But more than the physical changes, something inside him had fundamentally shifted. He realized that no amount of food, possessions, power, or pleasure had ever touched the emptiness he felt inside. He'd been trying to solve an internal problem with external solutions, and it had never worked because they addressed different dimensions of experience entirely. The problem wasn't that he needed more or better food. The problem was that he was looking in the wrong place for something that could only be found within. This is what happens when we chase external solutions for internal restlessness. You can have the feast and feel empty. You can have the wealth and feel insecure. You can have the success and feel inadequate. You can have the relationship and feel lonely. Because the restlessness isn't asking for more things, it's pointing to something missing in how you relate to your own experience, to your own mind, to this present moment. So where do we look instead? Buddhist wisdom points to something that sounds almost too simple. The peace you're seeking isn't something you need to acquire from outside yourself. It's something you already possess that you've forgotten how to access. Like King Pasenadi had the ability to eat mindfully all along, but needed help remembering it was even possible. This isn't about rejecting success or wealth or achievement. It's about understanding their limits. Money can buy comfort but not contentment. Success can bring respect from others but not self-respect. Achievement can prove your capability but not your worth as a human being. Pleasure can distract from discomfort but not resolve the underlying restlessness. There is a kind of well-being that doesn't depend on circumstances being a certain way. A peace that remains accessible whether you're rich or poor, healthy or sick, praised or criticized, succeeding or failing. This isn't fantasy or spiritual bypassing or pretending difficulties don't hurt. This is what the Buddha taught, based on his own direct experience, what thousands of practitioners have verified through their practice, what's available to anyone willing to look inward rather than outward, at the mind itself rather than at what the mind is grasping for. The people paying $200,000 for dinner with a millionaire are seeking something genuine, wisdom about how to navigate life successfully, guidance from someone who's figured things out, a path that leads somewhere better. They're not wrong to seek guidance. They're just not being offered the most valuable guidance available, the kind that addresses the root of restlessness rather than just rearranging its symptoms, the kind that leads to peace regardless of external conditions, rather than happiness dependent on circumstances cooperating. There's something far more valuable than that millionaire's secret, and it doesn't cost anything at all. Imagine you found Aladdin's lamp. You rub it, the genie appears, and you have 3 wishes, anything you want. What would you wish for? Most people know immediately. Financial security, health for loved ones, success in their work, maybe attractiveness, talent, recognition. The specifics vary, but the pattern is the same. We wish for external things we believe will make us happy. How much would you pay for that lamp? How much is it worth to have your deepest wishes granted? Some people would give everything they own for just one wish, let alone 3. But there's a problem built into the very nature of wishes. Everything the genie can give you is temporary. The wealth can be lost in a market crash. The health can fade with a single diagnosis. The success can evaporate when industries change or younger competitors arrive. The relationship can end. The beauty fades with time. Even if the genie granted you perfect circumstances, those circumstances are composed of impermanent elements that will eventually come apart. Buddhist teaching points to something more valuable than any wish a genie could grant. Not more valuable in a vague spiritual sense, but practically more valuable for your actual day-to-day experience of being alive. What if, instead of depending on circumstances to be happy, you could be happy regardless of circumstances? What if instead of needing life to go a certain way to feel okay, you could feel fundamentally okay, whether life goes your way or not? This sounds impossible to most people. It sounds like fantasy, like something monks claim but don't actually experience, like spiritual propaganda that doesn't hold up in real life. But there's a story from the Buddhist texts that shows just how real this possibility is. One day, the Buddha gathered his disciples and asked a question: "Who among you has unshakable concentration?" This was not a casual question. The Buddha was asking who among his students had developed a quality of inner stability so profound that nothing could disturb it. Who had found that unshakable peace we're talking about? Sariputta, one of the Buddha's closest disciples, known for his wisdom and insight, spoke up. His answer was remarkable. "Lord, my concentration is unshakable. Even if the entire world were to be destroyed, if the earth itself were to split apart, if the oceans were to boil away, if the sky were to collapse, it would not disturb my peace." Let that sink in for a moment. Sariputta wasn't saying he'd found a nice meditation technique that made him feel calm sometimes. He wasn't saying he'd learned to relax when things were going well. He was saying that he'd developed such profound inner stability that even the complete destruction of the world wouldn't shake his peace. This sounds like arrogance, or delusion, or exaggeration, but it wasn't. The Buddha didn't correct him or suggest he was being grandiose. Instead, the Buddha acknowledged that yes, this was accurate. Sariputta had indeed developed that level of unshakable inner peace. How is this even possible? Sariputta had discovered something fundamental about the nature of mind and experience. He'd learned that the peace he was experiencing didn't depend on external conditions being a certain way. It didn't come from the world being safe or pleasant or predictable. It came from a profound shift in his relationship to experience itself. When most of us encounter difficulty, we resist it. We tense against it, fight it, wish it were different, tell ourselves stories about how it shouldn't be happening. That resistance is where suffering lives. Not in the difficulty itself, but in our relationship to it. Sariputta had learned to meet experience without resistance, not by becoming passive or numb, but by developing such clear awareness that he could witness even intense experiences without being overwhelmed by them. He could feel pain without adding suffering on top of it through resistance. He could face loss without adding despair through clinging. He could encounter pleasant things without adding anxiety through grasping. This is what allowed him to say that even world destruction wouldn't disturb his peace. Not because he'd become inhuman or uncaring, but because he'd found something within awareness itself that remains stable regardless of what's appearing in awareness. Think about it this way. When you watch a movie, you can experience intense emotions, fear during horror scenes, sadness during tragic moments, joy during happy endings. But underneath all those changing emotional experiences, there's an awareness that's simply witnessing them without being destroyed by them. You can cry at a sad movie and still be fundamentally okay. The sadness is real, but it's not threatening your basic well-being. Sariputta had learned to relate to life itself the way you relate to a movie, fully experiencing whatever arises without identifying with it so completely that his sense of well-being depends on it. This is what practice builds. Not immunity to pain or difficulty, but a fundamental shift in your relationship to them that makes you unshakable, even when life shakes everything around you. And this isn't fantasy. This capacity exists within human consciousness. Sariputta wasn't special or superhuman. He was simply someone who practiced with dedication and discovered what becomes possible when you train your mind systematically. What he found is available to anyone willing to look in the same direction and do the work. This kind of peace works whether you're rich or poor. It doesn't require comfortable circumstances. In fact, some of the most peaceful practitioners have lived in extremely difficult conditions. It works whether you're alone or surrounded by people, whether you're young with your whole life ahead or old with most of it behind you, whether you're healthy or dealing with chronic illness. The difference between conditional and unconditional happiness is the difference between a lamp that needs to be plugged in and a lamp with its own internal power source. Conditional happiness requires the right circumstances, good health, financial security, pleasant relationships, comfortable conditions. When you have those things, you feel happy. When you lose them, happiness disappears. You're constantly at the mercy of conditions beyond your control. Unconditional well-being is different. It doesn't mean you prefer pain to pleasure, or that you don't have natural human preferences. It means that underneath those preferences, there's a fundamental okayness that doesn't depend on getting what you prefer. You can still work toward goals, build things, create comfort, but your basic peace doesn't hinge on those efforts succeeding. Now, hearing about Sariputta's unshakable peace might create the wrong impression. You might think this requires becoming a monk, renouncing the world, spending years in caves, meditating. You might think it's only for spiritual athletes willing to give up everything for practice. But there's another story that shows this isn't true. Chitta was a householder, not a monk, not a renunciate, not someone who'd left society to pursue enlightenment. He had a family, ran a business, dealt with all the ordinary complications of daily life that you deal with. He had to earn money, manage relationships, navigate conflicts, make difficult decisions. His life looked a lot like yours probably does. But Citta was also a practitioner. He took the Buddha's teachings seriously and integrated them into his ordinary life. He didn't wait until retirement to practice. He didn't tell himself he'd get serious about meditation once his business was established or his kids were grown. He practiced right in the middle of his messy, complicated, demanding life. During his work, while buying goods, negotiating prices, managing employees, handling customers, Citta practiced mindfulness. Not as some separate activity he did when he had free time, but as a quality of awareness he brought to whatever he was already doing. He learned to stay present during transactions, instead of getting lost in worry about profits. He practiced noticing his reactions to difficult customers, instead of just acting them out. He found moments of stillness, even in the middle of the marketplace. And something remarkable happened. Citta developed the ability to enter deep meditative states, not just while sitting in quiet rooms, but right in the middle of his ordinary activities. He could be negotiating a business deal and simultaneously rest in profound peace. He could be managing a conflict between employees and remain inwardly undisturbed. The Buddha heard about Citta's practice and praised him as one of the greatest lay disciples. Not because Citta had renounced the world, but because he'd found a way to practice deeply without renouncing anything. He proved that you don't need to choose between living fully in the world and developing profound inner peace. Citta showed that the marketplace can be as much a place of practice as a monastery. Your kitchen can be as valuable as a meditation hall. Your office can serve your awakening as much as a retreat center. The question isn't where you practice, but whether you practice, whether you bring awareness to the moments that make up your life. What made Citta's practice possible was a shift in understanding. He stopped seeing spiritual practice as something separate from daily life, something you do when you have free time or after you've handled your responsibilities. He started seeing every moment as an opportunity. The moment you wake up, the moment you speak to your partner, the moment you feel frustrated in traffic, the moment you make coffee. Every single moment offers a choice about where you place your attention and how you relate to your experience. Most people spend their whole lives waiting for the right conditions to practice. They tell themselves they'll start meditating once things calm down at work. They'll begin a serious practice once the kids are older. They'll really commit to it once they retire and finally have time. But things at work never fully calm down. Kids bring different challenges at every age, and retirement brings its own complications. Citta didn't wait. He worked with the life he had, practicing in the gaps and pauses, bringing awareness to the ordinary moments that most people overlook. And through that approach, he developed a depth of practice that earned praise from the Buddha himself. The contrast between these two stories tells you something important. Sariputta shows you what's ultimately possible, peace so profound that even world destruction wouldn't shake it. That might seem unattainable, but it points to the direction practice leads when you follow it far enough. It shows you there's no limit to how deep this peace can go. Chitta shows you what's immediately accessible, the possibility of practicing right where you are, with the life you actually have, without needing to wait for perfect conditions or make dramatic changes. He proves that you don't need to be a monk, or quit your job, or move to a monastery. You just need to begin, right here, with whatever moment you find yourself in. Together, these stories reveal something that changes how you might think about your own life. The treasure of unshakable peace isn't something reserved for special people or extraordinary circumstances. It's not hidden in far-off monasteries or accessible only after years of intensive retreat. It's available right now in your ordinary life if you know where to look and how to practice. This is more valuable than any wish a genie could grant because it doesn't depend on circumstances cooperating. The genie can give you health, but you'll still worry about losing it. The genie can give you wealth, but you'll still fear it running out. The genie can give you a perfect relationship, but you'll still feel the anxiety of potential loss. Every gift from the genie comes with the built-in suffering of impermanence. But the peace that comes from practice, that's yours. In a way, nothing external can ever be. No one can take it from you. No market crash can destroy it. No illness can steal it. No loss can erase it. Because it's not built on conditions that can change. It's built on a shift in how you relate to conditions, which remains stable even when conditions themselves are unstable. But here's where it gets counterintuitive: how happiness actually works. We operate under a simple equation that seems obvious. More satisfied desires equals more happiness. If getting what you want feels good, then getting more of what you want should feel even better. If satisfying one desire brings relief, then satisfying 10 desires should bring 10 times the relief. This makes perfect sense, and it drives almost every decision we make. We keep adding to the list of what we need, not just to survive, but to feel okay, to feel satisfied, to feel like life is working. But watch what actually happens when you follow this equation. Imagine someone, let's call them person A, who has 100 requirements for a good day. Not ridiculous things, just normal preferences that seem reasonable. The coffee needs to be hot and taste right. The commute needs to go smoothly without delays. Co-workers need to be pleasant and respectful. The work itself needs to feel meaningful. or at least not frustrating. Their boss needs to recognize their efforts. Lunch needs to be satisfying. The afternoon needs to have some energy, not just dragging exhaustion. The drive home needs to be clear, not stressful. Their partner needs to greet them warmly. Dinner needs to turn out well. The evening needs to have some relaxation without obligations piling up. They need to feel like they accomplished something today. Their body needs to feel decent. No headaches, no unexpected aches, no digestive issues. Sleep needs to come easily without lying awake worrying. And that's only 15 of 100 requirements. There are 85 more conditions that need to align for this person to end their day feeling satisfied. Now imagine person B, who has 5 requirements for a good day. They woke up breathing. They had something to eat. They had shelter when they needed it. Their body moved when they asked it to. They witnessed one moment of something worth noticing. Light through a window, a bird outside, someone's laugh, warmth from their coffee, even if it wasn't perfect. Which person has better odds of ending their day satisfied? The mathematics here are brutal and unavoidable. Person A needs 100 different things to align correctly. What are the chances of that happening on any given day? Essentially 0. Something will always go wrong. Traffic will be bad. A co-worker will be irritating. Their body will feel off. Dinner will be disappointing. Something won't meet the standard. They've guaranteed their own dissatisfaction through sheer probability. With 100 requirements, they're statistically doomed to disappointment. Person B needs 5 things, and all 5 are virtually guaranteed every single day. They'll wake up breathing. Check. They'll find something to eat. Check. They'll have shelter. Check. Their body will mostly cooperate. Check. One moment worth noticing? That's almost impossible to miss if you're even slightly paying attention. They're practically guaranteed satisfaction because their threshold is so achievable. Same world, same basic circumstances, completely different experiences of life. Not because one has better luck, but because one has made satisfaction almost impossible, while the other has made it almost inevitable. You can feel this in your own life right now. Think about a day recently when you felt disappointed, even though nothing terrible happened. Chances are, you'd built up requirements, maybe without even realizing it, and reality didn't meet them. The day was fine objectively, but it wasn't what you decided it needed to be for you to feel good about it. Now think about a time you felt genuinely content for no particular reason. Chances are you weren't requiring much in that moment. You were just present with what was actually there, without a checklist of conditions that needed to be met first. The equation we've been following is backwards. Happiness doesn't come from satisfying more desires. It comes from having fewer desires to satisfy in the first place. There's an old teaching from the Zen tradition that shows exactly how this works. It's told through a series of images about a young ox herder and his ox. The story begins with the herder standing alone confused, and anxious. His ox is gone. He doesn't know when he lost it, doesn't know where it went, doesn't even know where to begin looking. But he knows something essential is missing from his life, something he needs desperately to find before he can truly be okay. So he begins searching. He searches everywhere, through valleys, up mountains, across rivers, through forests thick with trees where visibility ends after a few steps. He asks every person he meets, "Have you seen my ox?" He follows rumors and suggestions, traveling miles based on second-hand information that usually leads nowhere. Days turn into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. The searching becomes his whole life. Every morning he wakes up thinking about the ox he's lost. Every evening he goes to sleep discouraged that another day has passed without finding it. He grows increasingly desperate, increasingly exhausted, increasingly convinced that his life can't really begin until he recovers what's been taken from him. This is how most of us live, convinced that something essential is missing, that we've lost access to contentment or peace or okayness, and if we could just find the right thing, the right job, the right relationship, the right amount of money, the right solution to this problem, then we'd finally have what we need to be happy. One day, after years of fruitless searching, the herder is walking through a forest he's searched many times before. His feet are tired, his heart is heavy, and he's beginning to lose hope that he'll ever find what he's looking for. Then he sees something on the ground that makes him stop completely. Tracks. Fresh ox tracks in the soft earth, clear as anything, leading deeper into the trees. His exhaustion vanishes instantly. His heart leaps in his chest. Finally, after all this time, finally evidence. Finally, a clue about where to look. He follows the tracks with renewed energy, certain the ox must be just ahead, just around the next tree, just beyond the next clearing. The tracks wind through the forest, sometimes clear, sometimes faint, but always leading forward. He follows them for what feels like hours, his anticipation building with each step. He's so close now. He can feel it. Then he enters a small meadow, and there it is. The ox. His ox, standing peacefully in the afternoon light, grazing on grass, completely unconcerned, exactly where it's supposed to be. But something about seeing it stops the herder completely. He doesn't rush forward to grab it. He just stands there at the edge of the clearing, watching and slowly understanding something that changes everything. The ox was never lost. It hadn't run away. It hadn't been stolen. It hadn't disappeared or abandoned him or vanished into thin air. It was just being an ox, grazing when hungry, resting when tired, moving naturally through its days, without drama or urgency or any sense that something was wrong. The herder had convinced himself the ox was lost, that something essential was missing, that he needed to search desperately to recover what had been taken from him. But the ox was nearby the whole time, peacefully existing, and the only thing keeping them apart was the herder's panic and his frantic searching and his absolute certainty that what he needed wasn't already here. He'd spent years searching for something he already had. All that exhaustion, all that desperation, all that suffering, none of it was necessary. He was chasing something that was never actually missing. This is what we do. We're convinced that contentment is lost, that happiness is somewhere else, that peace is something we used to have or might have in the future, but definitely don't have right now. So we search, we chase achievements, we pursue pleasures, we accumulate possessions, we build relationships, we try to fix our bodies and our circumstances and our lives, certain that the next thing will finally be what restores what we're missing. But what if you're not missing anything? What if the contentment you're seeking is already available right now, in this moment, as it actually is, and the only thing keeping you from it is your long list of requirements about how this moment needs to be different before you allow yourself to feel it? This is where Buddhist teaching gets radical. Not in some abstract philosophical way, but in a way that changes your actual daily experience, if you're willing to try it. Take every preference you're carrying, every demand about how things should be, every requirement for your satisfaction, all your ideas about what needs to be present for you to be okay, the perfect temperature, the right energy level, pleasant interactions, things going smoothly, your body feeling good, achieving what you wanted, being treated fairly, circumstances, cooperating with your plans. All of it, every single condition you place on your contentment, imagine gathering it up and putting it in a bag. Not sorting through it, not keeping the reasonable requirements and discarding the unreasonable ones, not refining your standards into better versions. Just taking the whole mechanism of requiring things to be certain ways before you can be okay and putting it in the bag. Then tie the bag closed and throw it away. Just release it entirely. This whole system of checking whether conditions meet your standards, this constant evaluation of whether what's happening is good enough, this exhausting work of measuring reality against your requirements and finding it lacking. What happens when you do this? You don't become passive or lose all standards or accept everything without discernment. What happens is you become free. Free from the constant background anxiety about whether conditions will meet your requirements. Free from the automatic disappointment when things don't go as expected. Free from exhausting yourself trying to control everything to match your preferences. Free from the suffering of demanding that reality be different than it is. You can have the adequate meal instead of requiring the perfect meal, and discover that adequate actually nourishes you just fine. You can have the cloudy day instead of requiring sunshine, and discover that clouds have their own beauty when you're not resenting them for not being sun. You can have the imperfect rest instead of requiring ideal conditions, and discover that your body rests anyway when you stop demanding it to be different. Buddhist teaching says, happiness doesn't come from satisfying desires, it comes from reducing desires. Not satisfying them better or more efficiently, reducing them, having fewer in the first place. Think about medicine when you're sick. Does it matter what the medicine tastes like? Maybe it's bitter. Maybe it makes you slightly nauseous. Maybe the texture is unpleasant. Do you refuse it because you don't like how it tastes? Of course not. The taste is completely irrelevant when what matters is whether the medicine heals you. Life works the same way. What matters isn't whether each moment feels pleasant or meets your preferences. What matters is whether you're present with your actual life as it's actually unfolding, which turns out to be the only life available to live. When you release your requirements, when you stop placing conditions on your contentment, when you throw away the bag of demands, what remains is a simple capacity to be here with what is. And there's a lightness to that, a relief, like you've been carrying something heavy your whole life, and someone finally told you that you're allowed to put it down. The weekend doesn't have to be perfect to be good. The meal doesn't have to meet 10 conditions to nourish you. The evening doesn't have to align perfectly to offer rest. Your day doesn't need 100 things to go right for you to be fundamentally okay. What if 5 things, or 3 things, or 1 thing, what if that's actually enough? What if the ox was never lost at all, and all this frantic searching has been keeping you from seeing what's already here? Now, before you think this means becoming passive or having no standards, here's the critical distinction. You're lying in bed at 11:30 at night, desperately needing sleep because tomorrow's important, but your mind won't stop. Thoughts keep coming, replaying today's conversations, planning tomorrow's tasks, worrying about next week's deadline. You've tried everything, different positions, counting breaths, telling yourself to relax, but sleep won't come. You feel the frustration building, that sense of your body betraying you. In your mind, you're demanding, just sleep. Stop thinking. I need to rest. Why won't you let me rest? Or you're standing in your kitchen watching water drip from the ceiling where it shouldn't be dripping. You just had this fixed 2 months ago, paid hundreds of dollars, and now it's leaking again from a different spot. You can see the water stains spreading, and you know this means more money, more contractors, more disruption. You feel that familiar sinking in your stomach, that mix of anger and helplessness. In your mind, you're demanding, stay fixed. Stop breaking. Why can't anything just work like it's supposed to? Or you're watching your elderly parents struggle to remember your name for the 3rd time this visit. They look at you with that confused expression, searching for something that's slipping away, and you can see them getting frustrated with themselves. Last month, they remembered perfectly. Last year, they were still sharp, still fully themselves. You feel it in your throat, that tightness that comes before tears. In your mind, you're demanding, remember, come back. Don't leave me while you're still here. Watch what happens in each of these moments. Your mind, demanding sleep, becomes more agitated with each demand. The very act of insisting, I must sleep now, activates your nervous system, floods you with stress hormones, guarantees the wakefulness you're fighting against. Your demand creates the exact opposite of what you want. And at 2 a.m, you're lying there exhausted but wired, having spent hours battling your own mind instead of simply being present with sleeplessness until sleep naturally arrives. Your ceiling, indifferent to your frustration, continues dripping. Your demand that it stay fixed changes nothing about the plumbing, the water pressure, the age of the pipes, but it changes everything about your experience of this moment. What could be simply, there's a leak, I need to call someone, becomes an hours-long internal war with reality, with unfairness, with the universe that refuses to cooperate, with your very reasonable desire for things to just work. Your parent, lost in the fog of their failing memory, doesn't suddenly snap back because you want them to. Your demand that they remember, that they stay themselves, that time stops stealing them from you. None of it changes the relentless progression of their condition. But it fills this precious moment with your resistance instead of your presence, with your demands instead of your love, with your wish for them to be different instead of your attention to who they actually are right now. This is the suffering that comes from demanding what you cannot control. Not the pain of the situation itself, that's real and unavoidable, but the additional layer of suffering you create by insisting reality should be other than it is. You can't demand your mind into sleep. You can't demand your house into staying fixed. You can't demand your parents' memory into returning. These things will unfold according to their own nature, their own causes and conditions, completely indifferent to your demands. But there's something you can control, something you have complete authority over, something that changes everything, even when circumstances don't change at all. Your response. Instead of demanding sleep, you can change your relationship to sleeplessness. Notice the thoughts arising without grabbing onto them. Feel the restlessness without fighting it. Let your body simply rest, even if sleep doesn't come. You can't force sleep, but you can stop forcing wakefulness through your resistance. Sometimes when you release the demand, sleep arrives on its own. Sometimes it doesn't, but you rest anyway because you've stopped exhausting yourself, fighting what is. Instead of demanding your house stay fixed, you can change your relationship to things breaking. Feel the frustration fully, without adding stories about unfairness. See the leak as simply information about what needs attention. Take action without the overlay of outrage that this is happening again. You can't control whether things break, but you can stop breaking yourself against the reality that they do. Instead of demanding your parent remember, you can change how you're present with them right now. Release the demand that they be who they were and meet who they are now. Hold their confusion with tenderness instead of resistance. Speak your name gently without making them feel ashamed for forgetting. Treasure this moment of being together, even though it's not the moment you wish you were having. You can't stop the progression of their illness, but you can stop missing the connection that's still available because you're demanding the connection that's no longer possible. This is where your actual power lives. Not in controlling circumstances, but in choosing how you meet circumstances. Not in making reality different, but in transforming your relationship to reality. So stop demanding from the world. Stop demanding from other people. Stop demanding from your own body and mind as if they're servants who must obey. Redirect all that demanding energy inward toward the one thing you actually have authority over: your own presence, your own response, your own way of being with what is. This is your life. Not the life you wish you had, not the life you think you deserve, but this actual life unfolding right now. This is your mind experiencing these thoughts, these feelings, these reactions. You're the one here, present in this body, in this moment, with these specific circumstances. No one else can live this life for you or tell you how to respond. This is your steering wheel, and your hands are on it whether you acknowledge it or not. The question is, are you steering, or are you just gripping the wheel while circumstances push you wherever they want? There's a teaching story about a monk named Sona that captures something essential about this. Sona was completely dedicated to his practice. He would meditate until his legs went numb, walk in meditation until his feet bled, practice with such intensity that his body was breaking down. He barely slept, barely ate, demanded from himself constant, perfect effort because he believed that's what spiritual progress required. But he wasn't progressing. Despite all his effort, or perhaps because of it, he felt farther from peace than when he'd started. He was exhausted, discouraged, his body damaged, his mind agitated from the constant pressure he was placing on himself. The Buddha noticed and asked about Sona's background. Before becoming a monk, Sona had been a musician who played the lute. The Buddha asked him a simple question: when you tuned your lute, what happened if the strings were too tight? They would break, Sona said. And if they were too loose? No sound would come out, just dead notes, no music. And when they were tuned just right, then the instrument could make beautiful music, Sona said, and suddenly understood what the Buddha was showing him. Demanding from yourself works the same way. Too much demand, and you break, exhausted, burned out, damaged by your own excessive standards. Too little demand and nothing happens. You drift, coast, never develop, because you never challenge yourself. But when you find the right tension, demanding enough to grow, but not so much that you destroy yourself, that's when transformation becomes possible. This is how you take back the steering wheel. Not through force, not through harsh demands that break you, but through wise, sustainable attention to what you're actually allowing to shape your life, moment by moment. It's a game of influence. Everything you encounter influences you, conditions you, shapes the grooves your mind naturally follows. The question is whether you're choosing those influences consciously or just accepting whatever comes your way. Look at your physical environment right now. What's around you? Is the space you inhabit supporting who you want to become, or reinforcing who you've always been? The clutter you see every day trains your mind toward chaos. The order you maintain trains your mind toward clarity. These aren't just aesthetic choices. They're choices about what influences your consciousness every single day. Look at your morning routine, those first moments after waking, when your mind is most impressionable. What's the first thing you do? Rush immediately into demands and obligations. That trains you to live reactive, always responding to external pressure. Or do you create even 5 minutes of settling into yourself before engaging with the world? That trains you to live from your own center instead of from constant reaction. Look at who you turn to when you're struggling. Not whether you reach out. That's healthy, but who you reach out to and what they reinforce. Some people, when you share your difficulties, immediately join you in outrage or helplessness, amplifying your distress. Others help you find your own steadiness again, reflecting back your capability without dismissing your pain. Who you turn to repeatedly shapes whether you're conditioning helplessness or resilience. Look at what you consume in those gaps throughout your day, waiting in line, between tasks, right before sleep. What fills those small spaces? Content designed to agitate and engage, keeping your nervous system activated. That trains you toward constant stimulation, making stillness feel intolerable. Or content that settles and centers, helping your system return to baseline. That trains you toward the capacity to simply be without needing constant input. Look at the internal narratives you rehearse when you're alone. Some people spend hours each day mentally replaying grievances, practicing arguments they'll never have, reinforcing stories about how they've been wronged or why things are unfair. Each rehearsal deepens those grooves, makes those patterns more automatic, conditions resentment as their default state. Others notice those narratives arising and choose not to feed them, not suppressing them, just not rehearsing them over and over. They practice different narratives, curiosity about why things happened, recognition of their own part in conflicts, or simply returning attention to what's actually present instead of stories about what should have been different. This trains a completely different mind. You get to choose these influences. Not perfectly. You can't control everything you encounter, but you have far more choice than you're exercising. If you're just accepting whatever comes, letting algorithms decide what you see, letting habits decide how you spend your attention, letting old patterns decide what narratives you rehearse. Don't let randomness decide what influences you. Don't let convenience determine what shapes your mind. Don't let everyone else's choices about what's normal define what you allow into your consciousness. You choose what's good for you. Not what feels easy right now, but what will serve you 10 years from now. Not what everyone else is doing, but what actually supports the person you're trying to become. Not what's comfortable or convenient, but what aligns with the life you're actually trying to live. Every small choice is a vote. The environment you create, the routine you establish, the people you seek out when struggling, the content you consume in spare moments, the narratives you rehearse when alone, each one is casting a vote for who you're becoming. Are you voting for someone more awake or more asleep, more reactive or more responsive, more scattered or more centered, more trapped in patterns or more free? The steering wheel is in your hands. You've been holding it this whole time, even when you thought circumstances were driving, even when you felt powerless, even when you blamed everything outside yourself for where you ended up. Your hands are on the wheel. The question is whether you're going to steer. This is your life, this messy, imperfect, challenging, beautiful life that keeps refusing to be what you demand it should be. This is your mind, this complicated, powerful, trainable mind that's been conditioned by everything you've encountered and can be reconditioned by choices you make right now. Stop demanding from what you can't control. Start demanding from yourself, not harshly, not excessively, but with the wise tension of a well-tuned instrument that's ready to make music. Take control. Choose what influences you. Decide who you're becoming through 10,000 small choices that no one else will ever see, but that will accumulate into the person you are 10 years from now. And this changes everything about how you handle difficult situations. There's a moment that comes every morning. Your alarm sounds, and in the space between sleep and waking, before thought fully forms, your hand reaches for your phone. It's automatic, practiced, a pattern repeated so many times that your body performs it without conscious decision. The blue glow fills your eyes. Notifications cascade down the screen, and suddenly you're reacting to the world before you've even felt your own breath. This feels comfortable, familiar, easy. Or there's another moment, maybe at work, when a colleague says something that lands wrong in your chest. A small criticism, a dismissive tone, something that stings. You feel the impulse to speak, to defend yourself, to clarify what they've misunderstood. But speaking up would be uncomfortable. Your voice might shake. They might argue back. The moment might become tense and awkward. So you stay silent, swallow the feeling, tell yourself it doesn't really matter. This feels comfortable too, safer, easier than the alternative. Or evening arrives and you're finally home, finally free of the day's demands. You know you plan to meditate or exercise or work on that project you care about. But the couch is right there, the TV is right there, your phone is right there, offering infinite ways to make the next few hours disappear without effort. And you're tired, so tired. Surely you deserve rest, deserve comfort, deserve ease after a long day. This feels like self-care, like being kind to yourself, like choosing what your body is telling you it needs. But watch what actually happens in each of these moments over time. The morning phone ritual means you start every single day reactive instead of centered. Your nervous system activates before you've even stood up, checking, comparing, responding, worrying about what others said, or need, or expect. You condition yourself to need external input before you can feel awake, to check for validation before you can feel okay, to consume information before you know what you actually think or feel or want. Do this for a year, and you've lost 365 mornings of meeting yourself first, of setting your own intention before responding to others' agendas, of starting your day from your own center. Do this for 10 years, and you've forgotten what it feels like to wake up as yourself, instead of immediately becoming a responder to notifications. The silent moment at work, swallowing your truth to avoid discomfort, means your authentic voice grows weaker, while your people-pleasing grows stronger. Each time you choose silence over honesty, you train yourself that your truth matters less than others' comfort, that keeping things smooth is more important than being real. You condition yourself toward a particular kind of safety that's actually a cage, the safety of never risking rejection by never showing up honestly. Do this for a year, and your relationships become performances, careful dances, where everyone's pretending and no one's connecting. Do this for 10 years, and you wake up one day realizing you're surrounded by people who know your mask but not your face, who like the version of you that never makes waves, but have no idea who you actually are beneath the performance. The evening collapse into distraction, choosing comfort over commitment, means your dreams stay dreams while your days disappear into other people's content. Each time you choose easy over meaningful, you train yourself that immediate comfort matters more than long-term development, that how you feel right now should determine what you do, that tired, is a reason to stop, rather than just a sensation to be present with while you do what matters anyway. Do this for a year, and the gap between who you are and who you want to become grows wider. Do this for 10 years, and you look back on a life where you meant to write the book, build the skill, create the thing, become the person, but you were tired, it was uncomfortable, scrolling was easier. This is what's actually happening when we let comfortable and uncomfortable determine our choices. We think we're just responding sensibly to how we feel in the moment. We don't realize we're conditioning patterns that will shape our entire lives. There's an old teaching from a Zen master to a student who couldn't maintain his practice. The student kept saying, "I want to meditate, but I just don't feel like it. I want to study, but it's uncomfortable sitting still that long. I want to change, but choosing what's difficult feels too hard." The master asked him, "When you're sick and the doctor gives you medicine, do you only take it if it tastes good?" The student looked confused. "No, of course not. I take it because it heals, regardless of taste." "Then why," the master asked gently, "do you only take medicine for your mind if it feels comfortable?" This question should land in your chest and stay there for days. Not because it's a clever philosophical puzzle to solve intellectually, but because it exposes something most of us have never questioned. We've been using comfort and discomfort as our primary decision-making criteria for our entire lives, and we've never once asked whether that's actually wise. We don't refuse antibiotics because they taste bad. We don't reject chemotherapy because it makes us nauseous. We don't decline surgery because recovery will be painful. When it comes to physical health, we understand that what matters isn't how something feels, but whether it heals. But when it comes to mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, we treat comfort like it's the goal, and discomfort like it's the enemy. We choose what feels easy over what's actually beneficial. We avoid what's uncomfortable, even when discomfort is exactly the medicine we need. Meditation feels uncomfortable, body restless, mind racing, everything in you wanting to move, to check your phone, to do anything except sit with your own experience. But that discomfort is the medicine working. It's showing you how scattered your attention has become, how dependent you are on external stimulation, how rarely you're actually present with yourself. The discomfort is revealing what needs to be seen so it can be healed. Scrolling feels comfortable, no effort, constant stimulation, endless novelty. But that comfort is the poison working. It's fragmenting your attention, training you toward distraction, conditioning you to need constant input to avoid being present with yourself. The comfort is hiding the damage it's doing. The difficult conversation with your partner feels uncomfortable, vulnerable, risky, potentially conflict-creating. But that discomfort is the medicine. It's creating space for real intimacy, building genuine trust, allowing both of you to be seen rather than just safe. The discomfort is what transforms surface-level harmony into deep connection. Avoiding the conversation feels comfortable. No risk, no tension. Everything stays pleasant on the surface. But that comfort is the poison. It's letting distance grow silently, allowing small resentments to accumulate, trading long-term intimacy for short-term ease. The comfort is killing your connection so slowly you don't notice until it's gone. Exercise when you don't feel like it feels uncomfortable. Body resisting, mind producing excuses. Bed or couch looking so appealing. But that discomfort is the medicine. It's building strength, training discipline, teaching you that you can do things regardless of how you feel about doing them. The discomfort is making you stronger in ways that matter far beyond physical fitness. Staying on the couch feels comfortable, no effort, just rest. But that comfort is the poison. It's weakening your body, reinforcing the habit of choosing ease over growth, stealing from your future health to buy momentary rest you don't actually need. The comfort is making you weaker in ways you won't notice until your body starts breaking down. Do you see the pattern? Comfort and benefit are not the same thing. They're often opposites. What feels comfortable in the moment frequently undermines your long-term well-being. What feels uncomfortable in the moment frequently serves your deepest growth. This is why Buddhist practice asks you to remove two phrases from your vocabulary entirely. The first, "This is comfortable," or "This is uncomfortable." The second, "I feel like it," or "I don't feel like it." These phrases make comfort your authority, your feelings, your guide, your momentary sensations, your decision maker. They suggest that how something feels should determine whether you do it, as if pleasant sensations mean beneficial action and unpleasant sensations mean harmful action. But this is completely backwards from how growth actually works. Replace "Is this comfortable?" with "Is this beneficial?" Replace "Do I feel like it?" with "Does this serve my growth?" These questions change everything because they shift your criteria from sensation to wisdom, from momentary feeling to long-term development, from comfort-seeking to purpose-following. You don't feel like meditating this morning. So what? You're not feeling like it is just a pattern of resistance that's been conditioned through repetition. It has no more authority than a craving for sugar or an itch that demands scratching. Notice, "I don't feel like it," as a thought arising in your mind. Acknowledge it without judgment, and then meditate anyway, not despite the feeling, but with complete indifference to it. The conversation feels uncomfortable. So what? Your discomfort is just your nervous system trying to protect you from potential conflict, an old survival mechanism that can't distinguish between genuine threat and simple challenge. Thank it for trying to help. Acknowledge that you feel the discomfort, and then speak your truth anyway, because honest communication serves the relationship more than comfortable silence ever could. You feel like collapsing into distraction after work? So what? You're feeling like it is just fatigue mixed with habit, your body's preference for ease mixed with years of conditioning toward avoidance. Notice the feeling, be present with the tiredness, and then do what matters anyway, because your life is built through what you actually do, not through what you feel like doing. When you remove comfort and feeling like it as your decision criteria, you discover something profoundly liberating. You can do things regardless of how you feel about doing them. Your actions become independent of your passing emotional weather. You're finally free to act according to your deeper values instead of your surface moods. This doesn't mean becoming masochistic or seeking discomfort for its own sake. It's not about punishing yourself or treating all pleasure as suspect. It means discomfort stops being a reason to quit, and comfort stops being a reason to continue. Both are just sensations, just weather, just passing states that you can be present with while you choose your actions based on what actually serves your development. Sometimes, what serves you is comfortable, nourishing rest when genuinely exhausted, connection when lonely, warmth when cold. Sometimes what serves you is uncomfortable, honesty when it's risky, discipline when it's hard, presence when you'd rather escape. The point isn't always choosing discomfort. The point is removing comfort as the deciding factor. This goes against everything modern culture teaches. We're taught that comfort is the goal, that convenience is progress, that making everything easier is obviously better. Entire industries exist to eliminate discomfort from your life, to make things faster, smoother, more effortless, more pleasant. We're taught that if something's uncomfortable, you should find an easier way, try something else, stop doing it. We're taught that discomfort means something's wrong. Buddhist teaching says discomfort often means something's right. Right in the sense that you're working at your growing edge. Right in the sense that you're choosing what serves over what's easy. Right in the sense that you're training yourself in ways that matter. You don't go to the gym to be comfortable. You go to strain, to challenge, to push past current limits. The discomfort is the point. That's what creates strength. If you only lift weights that feel comfortable, you never get stronger. The same principle applies to every dimension of growth. Mental strength comes from thinking through difficult problems, even when it's easier to give up. Emotional maturity comes from staying present with difficult feelings, even when it's easier to numb out. Spiritual depth comes from facing your own patterns, even when it's easier to stay distracted. In every case, discomfort signals you're working at your edge rather than staying in your comfort zone. This requires maturity that our culture doesn't cultivate. Maturity means being able to choose long-term benefit over short-term pleasure. It means sacrificing immediate comfort for future well-being, enduring present difficulty for eventual growth, delaying gratification because you can see beyond this moment to where your choices actually lead. Children can't do this yet. A child always chooses candy now over health later, distraction over lesson, immediate comfort over long-term benefit. That's not a failing, just a developmental stage. Their brains haven't developed the capacity to weight future consequences against present desires. But many adults operate the same way. They choose immediate gratification over long-term health, instant entertainment over meaningful work, comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths, momentary ease over sustained development. They're making decisions like children, driven by what feels good right now, with little consideration for where those choices lead over years and decades. Maturity is the capacity to hold a longer view, to see that the workout you don't feel like doing today contributes to the vitality you want at 70. To understand that the difficult conversation you're avoiding now will either happen later under worse circumstances or slowly poison your relationship through years of accumulated silence. To recognize that the meditation you skipped this morning is one more missed opportunity to train the mind that will serve you every moment of every day for the rest of your life. Pleasant and beneficial are not the same thing. Pleasant is what feels good right now. Beneficial is what serves your growth, your health, your freedom, your deepest values over time. When they overlap, wonderful, enjoy it. When they conflict, maturity means choosing beneficial over pleasant, medicine over candy, what serves over what's easy. This is the wisdom of delayed gratification, understanding that the greatest satisfactions in life usually require short-term discomfort. The satisfaction of a body that moves well comes from years of uncomfortable workouts. The satisfaction of a skill truly mastered comes from hours of uncomfortable practice. The satisfaction of relationships that go deep comes from countless uncomfortable moments of choosing honesty over harmony. The satisfaction of a mind that's free comes from years of uncomfortable encounters with your own patterns. None of it's comfortable in the moment. All of it creates something more valuable than comfort ever could. A life actually lived, rather than just survived. A self actually developed, rather than just maintained. A presence actually cultivated, rather than constantly avoided. But people often confuse this with one of Buddhism's most misunderstood teachings. The teaching people often confuse with what we just discussed is karma. And the confusion about karma might cause more suffering than any other misunderstanding in Buddhist practice. Let me tell you about a man named Sandana. Every morning before dawn, Sandana would walk through the garden behind the wealthy household where he worked, collecting flowers in the darkness. His hands knew the stems by touch. Lotus blossoms still closed, jasmine releasing its night fragrance, marigolds cool with dew. He would gather them carefully, arrange them beautifully at the household shrine, perfect offerings to honor the family's devotion. Every evening as the sun set, he would return to collect those same flowers. Now wilted, faded, their beauty spent, he would gather them without ceremony and throw them in the trash. Day after day, year after year, the same ritual. Fresh flowers in morning light, wilted flowers in evening shadow, always ending in the trash. He had done this for so long that his hands moved without thought. His feet followed the path without attention. His mind was somewhere else entirely, usually rehearsing all the reasons his life would never change, could never be different, was fixed by forces beyond his control. One evening, as Sandana was throwing away that day's wilted offerings, a wandering teacher happened to walk past. The teacher, it was the Buddha, stopped and watched Sandana for a moment. Then he asked a simple question. "Why do you throw these flowers away?" Sandana barely glanced up. "Because they're finished. Used up. No longer beautiful. What else would I do with them?" The Buddha stepped closer, picked up one of the wilted blossoms from the trash, held it gently in his palm. This flower served its purpose beautifully this morning. It offered its fragrance, its color, its presence. Now it's transformed into something different, and you call it waste. He looked at Sandana with eyes that seemed to see right through him. "Tell me, why do you treat yourself the same way?" Sandana's hands stopped moving. "What?" "You've decided you're finished too, haven't you? Used up. Your purpose already determined and nearly spent. I can see it in how you move, how you barely look at the flowers anymore, how you've stopped seeing anything including yourself." Something in Sandana's chest tightened. Tears came suddenly, unexpectedly. "You don't understand," he said, his voice breaking. "My karma was decided the moment I was born. Low caste, poor family. This work, this is what I am. This is what I will always be. The universe determined this before I took my first breath, and there's nothing I can do to change it. I'm like these flowers. My purpose was small, and now even that's nearly finished." The Buddha sat down right there on the ground, gestured for Sandana to sit beside him. "Let me tell you what karma actually is," he said gently. "Because what you think it is, that's killing you more surely than any circumstance ever could." He picked up a small stone, tossed it gently down the hill. They both watched it roll, bouncing, finding the natural grooves and channels in the earth, following the path of least resistance until it came to rest. "Your karma is like that stone's path," the Buddha said. "It moves in a certain direction because of forces acting on it. The slope of the ground, the channels already carved by water, the obstacles in the way. But look, if I had thrown the stone differently, If someone had dug a new channel in the earth, if rain had created a different path, would the stone have rolled the same way? No, Sandana said quietly. Your karma is not a sentence pronounced by the universe, the Buddha continued. It's the momentum of patterns you've been repeating. Every time you think, this is all I am, you carve that channel deeper. Every time you move through your day without seeing, without presence, without recognizing that this moment is new, even if your actions are old, you're choosing the same path again. Not because you must, but because that path is so familiar, your feet follow it automatically. Sandana looked at his hands, rough from years of work, stained with flower stems and earth. But I've been walking this path my whole life, he said. How can I possibly walk a different one now? The same way flowers transform, the Buddha said, holding up the wilted blossom again. This flower didn't choose to be a bud, didn't choose to bloom, doesn't choose now to wilt. But in every stage, it's completely itself, completely present to its own transformation. It doesn't spend its blooming morning that it's not still a bud, doesn't spend its wilting morning that it's no longer blooming. It transforms naturally because that's what living things do. He handed the wilted flower to Sandana. You're a living thing too. You're transforming whether you notice it or not. The question is whether you'll transform consciously, choosing the direction, or unconsciously, just following old grooves carved by old thoughts. Something shifted in Sandana as he held that wilted flower. He'd held thousands of them, thrown thousands away, without really seeing them. But now, looking at it, really looking, he saw it wasn't waste at all. It was completion, transformation, the natural cycle of things changing form without losing their essential nature. Start small, the Buddha said, standing to leave. Tomorrow morning when you gather flowers, actually see them. Tomorrow evening when you collect them, actually honor what they've offered instead of just discarding them. Not because it will change your caste or your circumstances, but because it will change the path your attention walks, and where attention goes, everything follows. Sandana did start small. The next morning, he paused at each flower before cutting it. He noticed the way the lotus held water in its petals, how the jasmine's fragrance shifted as sun touched it, the precise geometry of each marigold's petals. Just noticing, just being present with what was actually there, instead of moving through the routine half asleep, as he'd done for years. That evening, instead of throwing the wilted flowers directly in the trash, he began composting them carefully. He created a small area in the corner of the garden where wilted flowers would slowly become soil, feeding next season's blooms. The task took no more time than throwing them away, but his attention had completely changed. He was present with the transformation instead of just discarding it. These seem like tiny changes, noticing flowers, composting instead of trashing. But something profound was shifting in Sandana's daily experience. When the thought arose, "I'm just a low-caste florist," instead of believing it automatically, he would pause and ask, "Is that thought true right now, in this moment, or is it just an old groove my mind follows?" When he felt the urge to move through his work automatically, he would bring his attention back deliberately. What am I actually seeing, smelling, touching right now? Over weeks, then months, these small redirections of attention accumulated. He started noticing which plants thrived in shade versus sun, which soil mixtures produced the healthiest blooms, which flowers could be propagated and which couldn't. He began experimenting, not because anyone asked him to, but because his attention was now actually present with the work. Children from the neighborhood would watch him tending the garden, and he started showing them what he'd learned. Not teaching formally, just sharing when they asked questions. "This one needs more water. This one will bloom next week if we're patient. This one's seeds can grow into next year's garden." More children came, then their parents, asking advice about their own small gardens. The household noticed his increased care and gave him more responsibility. Other wealthy families asked for his guidance. Within 2 years, Sandana was known not as just a florist, but as someone with genuine knowledge, real skill, wisdom about growth and transformation that went far beyond arranging offerings. But more than any external change, something internal had transformed completely. He no longer moved through his days feeling finished, used up, trapped by predetermined fate. He'd discovered that his karma, his conditioning, his patterns, the grooves his mind habitually followed, wasn't fixed destiny at all. It was flowing water that could be redirected through attention, through choice, through the simple act of being present with his actual life, instead of lost in thoughts about how his life should have been different. This is what the Buddha meant by karma. Not some cosmic scoreboard tallying good deeds and bad deeds, rewarding and punishing from on high. Not some predetermined fate sealed at birth that you're powerless to change. Just the simple recognition that you're conditioning yourself constantly through what you think, what you say, what you do, and especially through what you pay attention to. Every time you respond to criticism with anger, you're conditioning yourself toward anger. Do it 1,000 times, and anger becomes automatic. Every time you respond to uncertainty with anxiety, you're conditioning yourself toward anxiety. Do it 1,000 times, and anxiety becomes your default state. Every time you move through your day without presence, you're conditioning yourself toward absence. Do it for years, and you become like Sandana was, alive but not living, going through motions without actually experiencing your own life. But the opposite is equally true. Every time you pause when anger arises and choose not to act on it, you're weakening that conditioning. Every time you notice anxiety and stay present, instead of spiraling into worst-case scenarios, you're creating new patterns. Every time you bring your full attention to this moment instead of half living through it while your mind is somewhere else, you're training yourself toward presence. Do this enough times, not perfectly, just consistently, and you discover what Sandana discovered. You're not trapped by your past patterns. They're strong, yes, worn deep like water channels in earth, but they're not stone. They're flowing water, and flowing water can find new channels when you're patient enough to dig them. There's a second misunderstanding about karma that's equally harmful. Some people hear karma and dismiss it entirely as superstition, as pre-scientific thinking, as feel-good nonsense that makes people think their thoughts matter, when really, everything is just neurons firing and chemicals reacting. My intentions don't actually affect anything, this view says. The universe doesn't care what I think or intend, only what I physically do, and even that's just cause and effect on a purely material level. But watch what happens in real life. Two people encounter the same rush hour traffic. Both get cut off by an aggressive driver. Identical external situation. But one person has been conditioning patience for years. They notice irritation arise. Take a breath. Let it pass. Their heart rate barely changes. They arrive at work unaffected. The incident is forgotten within minutes. The other person has been conditioning reactivity for years. They feel rage immediately, start yelling, drive aggressively the rest of the way, arrive at work with elevated blood pressure and stress hormones flooding their system. They complain about it to co-workers, replay it mentally for hours. It affects their mood all day, their interactions with others, even their sleep that night, as they lie awake, still fuming about that driver. Same situation, completely different lives. Not because the universe magically rewarded one and punished the other, but because their conditioning determined their response, and their response determined the actual effects in their body, their relationships, their state of mind. Karma isn't magic, it's psychology. It's the recognition that your mental patterns shape your responses shape your experiences reinforce your patterns, and this feedback loop creates your actual lived reality over time. The person conditioning patience lives in a fundamentally calmer world, not because their circumstances are calmer, but because their mind meets circumstances differently. The person conditioning reactivity lives in a fundamentally more agitated world, not because their circumstances are more agitating, but because their mind amplifies every difficulty into a crisis. Your conditioning is your karma, and your karma is not destiny. It's simply momentum. Momentum can be redirected, but it takes patience, consistency, and the willingness to make different choices, even when the old patterns feel automatic. And this reveals something crucial about why some people understand this teaching immediately, while others can't hear it, no matter how clearly it's explained. There's an old story about a king who wanted to understand something about truth and perception. He'd been noticing how people could experience the same event and come away with completely different understandings of what happened. Each person absolutely certain they were right, and everyone else was confused or lying. So he gathered a group of men who'd been blind since birth, men who'd never seen anything with their eyes, who knew the world only through touch and sound and smell. He brought them to the palace courtyard, where an elephant stood waiting, and he asked each man to approach the elephant and describe what they found. The first man walked forward carefully, hands outstretched, until his fingers met something solid and smooth and slightly curved. He ran his hands along the surface, feeling its shape, its cool temperature, the way it felt like polished stone but with some give to it. An elephant, he announced with certainty, is like a wall, flat, solid, immovable, clearly built for protection and strength. The second man approached from a different angle, and his hands found something completely different. Long, flexible, muscular, moving independently, able to grasp and release. He explored it thoroughly, feeling how it could coil and extend, how strong it was, despite its flexibility. "No," he said firmly, "an elephant is like a snake. Long, powerful, able to move and grip. Clearly, a creature of flexibility and reach." The third man's hands landed on something sharp and smooth and curved to a point. He traced its length carefully, feeling how solid it was, how it tapered to a dangerous tip, how it was clearly designed as a weapon. "You're both wrong," he declared. "An elephant is like a spear, hard, sharp, obviously meant for piercing and defense." The fourth man found something thin and flexible, almost rope-like, hanging and swaying. He tugged it gently, felt how it moved freely, how it seemed almost insignificant compared to what he'd expected. "None of you understand," he said with frustration. "An elephant is like a rope, thin, hanging, clearly used for tying or pulling things." The fifth man encountered something wide and flat and leathery, moving gently back and forth. He felt the texture, the way air moved when it moved, the size of it. "How can you all be so wrong?" he said, exasperated. "An elephant is obviously like a fan, broad, flat, moving to create breeze." The sixth man's hands found something thick and rough and cylindrical, solid, like a tree trunk, supporting great weight. He wrapped his arms around it, felt its stability, its strength, how it clearly held up something massive above it. "This is ridiculous," he announced. "An elephant is like a pillar, strong, stable, obviously supporting a great structure." The king asked them to step back, and immediately they began to argue. "A wall," insisted the first man. "I felt it clearly, solid, flat, immovable." "Impossible," said the second. "It's clearly a snake, flexible, powerful, able to grasp." "You're both delusional," said the third. "It's obviously a spear," I felt the sharp point myself. Back and forth they argued, each man absolutely certain of his own truth, each convinced the others were either lying or too foolish to understand what they'd clearly felt with their own hands. The argument grew heated, voices rising, each man becoming more entrenched in his position with each exchange. The king let them argue for a while, watching how certainty bred defensiveness, how partial truth masqueraded as complete truth, how each man's direct experience blinded him to any other possibility. Then he spoke. "You're all correct," he said quietly, and the men fell silent, confused. "And you're all wrong." He explained what each had touched: the side like a wall, the trunk like a snake, the tusk like a spear, the tail like a rope, the ear like a fan, the leg like a pillar. Each man had encountered genuine truth. Each had accurately described what he'd experienced. But each had taken his partial truth and declared it the whole truth, had taken his limited contact and proclaimed complete understanding. None of them were lying. None of them were stupid. Each one's experience was completely valid, within its limits. But those limits were invisible to them because they could only know what they'd touched, could only understand based on their own direct contact, could only see what their own position allowed them to see. This is exactly what happens when you try to share what you're learning from Buddhist practice with people who haven't touched it themselves yet. You're standing at the elephant's trunk, feeling its power and flexibility, understanding through direct experience something profound about working with your own mind. You've spent months, maybe years, exploring this particular aspect of practice. Maybe you've discovered how meditation reveals the constant movement of thoughts, or how pausing before reacting creates genuine freedom, or how releasing demands actually increases peace instead of decreasing it. And because this has been so valuable for you, because it's changed your actual lived experience in ways you can feel every day, you want to share it with people you care about. You want your partner to experience this peace, your friend to find this relief, your family to understand this freedom. So you try to explain what you've found. But they're standing at a completely different part of the elephant. Maybe they haven't touched the elephant at all yet. Maybe they've touched a different part and concluded something entirely different. Maybe they're not even in the courtyard yet. They're still outside the walls, hearing about elephants secondhand, forming theories based on descriptions rather than direct contact. So when you try to explain what you've found, it doesn't land. Or worse, it lands wrong. They hear your words through their own framework, their own understanding, their own position relative to the elephant, and what they hear is completely different from what you meant. You talk about reducing desires, and your friend who's barely surviving financially hears you advocating poverty and thinks you've lost touch with reality. You talk about releasing demands from others, and your partner hears you saying you don't care about the relationship anymore and thinks you're becoming cold. You talk about meditation revealing the nature of mind, and your parent hears weird spiritual jargon, and worries you've joined a cult. This isn't because they're stupid or because you're explaining it wrong. It's because your level of direct contact with the practice has shown you things that simply can't be understood through description alone. You're describing the trunk's flexibility to someone who's only ever touched the tusk's hardness, and no amount of articulate explanation will bridge that gap, because understanding requires experience, not just information. This is what Buddhist teachers mean when they talk about levels of consciousness or readiness for teaching. It's not about intelligence. Some of the most brilliant people you know might not be able to hear these teachings yet, while someone with no formal education might understand immediately. It's not about being special, or chosen, or better than others. It's simply about where someone is in their own direct contact with these truths. Watch how the same teaching lands completely differently depending on someone's readiness. You tell 3 different people, your happiness doesn't depend on external circumstances. It comes from your relationship to circumstances. Person A, who's currently in crisis, maybe they just lost their job, or their relationship ended, or they're dealing with a serious health diagnosis, hears this as dismissive and cruel. They're touching the elephant's tusk, sharp, painful reality, and your teaching about the trunk's flexibility sounds absurd, offensive, even. Person B, who's been comfortable but feeling vaguely unsatisfied, hears it as an interesting idea to consider. That makes sense intellectually, they might say, but it stays theoretical, something they agree with in principle, but don't actually apply because they haven't yet experienced enough disappointment with external solutions to be ready for internal ones. Person C, who's been working with their own mind through meditation or therapy or just life experience, hears it as confirmation of something they're discovering directly. Yes, they say immediately, sometimes with relief at finally hearing it articulated. They're ready because their own experience has already shown them hints of it. Same teaching, same words, 3 completely different receptions. Not because you explained it poorly or they understood it wrong, but because understanding depends on readiness, and readiness depends on your own direct contact with reality in ways that words alone can't convey. This is why you can't convince anyone of anything that matters. Conviction comes from direct experience, not from explanation. You can't convince someone meditation is valuable. They have to sit and discover what happens when they actually practice. You can't convince someone that releasing demands brings peace. They have to try it and feel the relief directly. And trying to convince them often makes things worse. When you try to convince your partner to meditate, they hear you saying they're not enough, as they are, that they need to be fixed, that your practice is making you judge them. When you try to convince your friends that they're suffering unnecessarily, they hear you dismissing their real struggles, pretending to be enlightened, losing touch with normal human experience. When you try to convince your family that this Buddhist stuff is actually meaningful, they hear you rejecting your upbringing, getting weird, potentially heading toward instability. You're trying to explain the trunk to people touching the leg, and each attempt at explanation just makes them more certain you're confused, more defensive about what they know to be true, more worried about your increasing strangeness. So here's what actually works. Stop trying to convince anyone. Not because you don't care about them, but because care means meeting people where they actually are, instead of demanding they meet you where you are. Your practice is for you. The peace you're finding, the freedom you're developing, the clarity you're cultivating, that's yours. It doesn't require anyone else to validate it by understanding it or joining you in it. And actually, protecting your practice from premature sharing prevents all kinds of problems. When you keep quiet about what you're discovering, you don't have to defend insights that are still forming. You don't have to watch people you love misunderstand things that matter to you. You don't have to navigate the weird social dynamics that emerge when you start talking about consciousness and meditation while everyone else is talking about normal concerns. You don't have to manage others' worry that you're changing in ways that might leave them behind. You just practice quietly. You apply what you're learning. You let the changes show up in how you actually live, rather than in what you explain about how you're trying to live. And transformation speaks so much louder than words ever could. When your partner notices you're not getting as triggered by small things anymore, they don't need an explanation about meditation and reactivity. They just appreciate the change. When your friend sees you handling difficulty with more steadiness, they don't need a lecture about Buddhist teachings on suffering. They just notice you seem different, more grounded somehow. When your family observes you becoming more genuinely present with them, they don't need to understand your practice. They just enjoy the quality of connection. Your actual transformation is the teaching. How you show up, how you respond, how you remain steady when things get difficult. That communicates infinitely more than any explanation ever could. And if people get curious, if they notice something different about you and ask what's changed, then you have an opening to share, but only as much as they're actually ready to hear. You can mention meditation without preaching about its benefits. You can talk about what you're learning without insisting they should learn it too. But most of the time, just practice quietly and let your life be the evidence that something valuable is happening, without needing anyone to understand what that something is or join you in discovering it. Be very careful what you share and with whom. Not because practice is secret or exclusive, but because sharing prematurely invites misunderstanding, triggers defensiveness, and often damages both the teaching and your relationships. Some pearls simply can't be appreciated until someone's ready to see them as pearls, rather than just strange, shiny rocks. This isn't spiritual elitism. It's simple recognition that the blind man at the tusk cannot understand what you're describing about the trunk until he walks around the elephant and touches it himself. No amount of explanation bridges that gap. Only his own movement, his own curiosity, his own willingness to explore can reveal what you're talking about. So don't waste your energy trying to convince him. The elephant is flexible when all he's ever felt is hardness. Just let him discover in his own time what the elephant actually is. And trust that if this practice is genuinely transforming you, people will notice the transformation itself long before they understand the practice that created it. So how do you actually practice in daily life without becoming weird? Start paying attention to the word need in your own thinking. Not in a judgmental way, not to criticize yourself, just to notice how often it appears and what you're attaching it to. I need coffee to function properly. Do you actually? Or have you just trained your body and mind to expect coffee, and now the absence of it feels uncomfortable because it's not what you're used to? What if you could function, maybe differently, maybe less energetically at first, but still function without it? I need to finish this project by Friday. Do you actually? Or is Friday just an arbitrary deadline that could be negotiated, extended, or released if necessary? What if Friday passes and the project isn't done? Do you actually cease functioning? Or do you just feel uncomfortable with having missed your own expectation? I need my partner to understand what I'm saying. Do you actually? Or would it just be nice, preferable, easier if they understood? What if they don't understand? Can you still be okay? Can the relationship still function? Can you still exist without their understanding being present? I need things to go smoothly today. Do you actually? Or have you just gotten used to smooth days and now any friction feels intolerable? What if things don't go smoothly? Will you actually fall apart? Or will you just be uncomfortable while you handle whatever arises? Notice how often need appears, and notice what happens when you gently question whether it's actually a need or just a strong preference you've elevated to necessity. Because here's what's actually true. Most of what you think you need, you don't. You've just become so accustomed to having it or expecting it that its absence feels impossible to tolerate. But feeling impossible to tolerate and actually being impossible to tolerate are completely different things. Each thing you label as a need becomes a potential point of suffering. Because if you need it and don't have it, you suffer. If you need it and might lose it, you suffer from fear of loss. If you need it and have it, you suffer from anxiety about keeping it. The need itself, not the thing, but the quality of needing it, creates suffering in every direction. Watch this play out with something simple like temperature. You walk into a room and immediately register, too cold. Your body tenses. Your mind starts problem solving. Where's the thermostat? Can I adjust it? Should I get a sweater? Why is it always so cold in here? You've decided you need the room to be warmer for you to be comfortable, and that need has just created a problem where a moment ago there was just temperature. But what if you simply notice it's cold? Not too cold, not unacceptably cold, just cold. Your body might still reach for a sweater. That's practical, not problematic. But there's no suffering in the reaching, no story about how things should be different, no requirement that reality change before you can be okay. You're just responding to cold with appropriate action, without adding the layer of needing it to be different before you can be present. Or watch it with people's responses to you. You say something in a meeting and nobody responds. Silence. If you need people to respond, to validate your contribution, to show they're listening, that silence becomes excruciating. Your mind spins. Was it stupid? Are they dismissing me? Do they think, I don't know what I'm talking about? Why aren't they saying anything? The need for response has turned neutral silence into a source of suffering. But what if you simply notice? Silence. You said something, people are quiet, and you don't need that silence to mean anything particular about you or your contribution. Maybe they're thinking, maybe they didn't hear, maybe they have nothing to add, maybe they disagree but don't want to argue. You genuinely don't know what the silence means, and you don't need to know, and you don't need it to be different. You're just present with silence without requiring response. This is what gently reducing dependencies looks like. Not forcing yourself to go without things, not becoming ascetic, or depriving yourself to prove you can endure, not making suffering a virtue. Just noticing where you've turned preferences into requirements, where you've elevated want to need, where you've made your basic okayness dependent on conditions being a particular way. And then experimenting with releasing just one. Not all of them at once. That's overwhelming and usually leads to backlash, where you swing back to needing everything even more. Just one requirement this week. Pick something small enough that it won't disrupt your life, but real enough that you'll notice when you release it. Maybe you release the requirement that your morning coffee be perfect. You still have coffee. You're not torturing yourself, but you don't need it to be hot, strong, from your favorite mug, consumed in peace. If it's lukewarm, fine. If it's weaker than you like, fine. If you have to drink it while rushing around, fine. You're releasing the requirement that conditions be ideal, just noticing what it's like to have coffee under whatever conditions are actually present. Or maybe you release the requirement that people respond to your messages quickly. You still send messages, still hope for responses, but you don't need them to come within an hour, or a day, or even a week. When someone takes time to respond, you don't make it mean they don't care, or they're avoiding you, or you're not important. You just notice they haven't responded yet. And you're okay anyway, because you've released the requirement that their response timing determine your emotional state. Or maybe you release the requirement that your body feel good today. You still take care of it, still rest when tired, still eat when hungry, but you don't need to feel energetic, pain-free, comfortable in every moment. If your back aches, you notice back aching. If you're tired despite sleeping enough, you notice tiredness present. You respond practically. Maybe you move differently, maybe you rest more, but you don't add the suffering of needing your body to feel different than it actually feels right now. Pick one requirement. Release it for a week. Not forever, not as some grand spiritual commitment, just as an experiment in noticing what happens when you stop making one particular thing mandatory for your okayness. What you'll probably discover is surprising. You're fine without it. Not fine in the sense of loving the situation or preferring it or wanting it to continue, but fine in the sense that your fundamental being continues. Your basic okayness remains intact. You're still here and still functioning, despite the condition not being met. And that discovery is freedom, because each requirement you release is one less thing that can cause you to suffer, one less condition that needs to be met for you to be okay, one less dependency making you vulnerable to circumstances beyond your control. There's a story from the Buddhist texts about a monk named Bakula that shows where this principle leads when you follow it all the way. Bakula lived for 160 years, and in all those years, 16 decades of being alive in a human body, he never experienced illness. Not once. Never felt pain significant enough to require medicine. Never had a headache. Never had digestive problems. Never experienced the aches and ailments that most people consider normal parts of having a body. This sounds impossible, like genetic luck, or exceptional circumstances, or an exaggerated story. But the Buddhist texts are clear about why Bakula enjoyed such perfect health. It wasn't genetics or circumstances. It was the result of 80 years of contentment practice. For 80 years, Bakula practiced needing nothing from his experience. Hot, cold, hungry, full, comfortable, uncomfortable, praised, blamed, succeeding, failing, none of it needed to be different than it was for him to be fundamentally okay. He wasn't trying to achieve perfect health. He wasn't practicing contentment in order to get something. He was simply releasing his requirements, one after another, until there was almost nothing he needed reality to provide for him to be at peace. And something remarkable happened in his body as a result. When you need so little, when your nervous system isn't constantly activated by requirements not being met, when you're not generating stress about conditions needing to be different, your body settles into a profound baseline calm. That calm, maintained over decades, apparently allowed Bakula's body to function with such ease that illness never arose. He wasn't superhuman. He wasn't special. He was just someone who'd released so many requirements that his system could finally rest. And in that rest, health maintained itself effortlessly in ways that seem miraculous to those of us who are constantly churning with needs and demands and conditions that must be met. Now, you're probably not going to live 160 years without illness just from releasing your requirement for perfect coffee. That's not the point of the story. The point is to show you the direction this practice moves, toward more ease, more freedom, more capacity to be okay regardless of circumstances. Bakula represents what becomes possible when you follow this principle all the way. You're just taking the first steps in that direction by noticing and releasing one requirement at a time. And even those first steps change something fundamental in your daily experience. Because here's what remains when you stop requiring so much from each moment: more joy, not less. This sounds backwards. You'd think that releasing requirements would make life duller, more resigned, less engaged. But watch what actually happens when you stop needing your coffee to be perfect. You're actually present with the coffee you have, instead of comparing it to the coffee you wanted. You're tasting it, feeling its warmth, experiencing the actual sensations, instead of filtering everything through evaluation of whether it meets your standards. When you stop needing people to respond immediately, you're actually free to focus on whatever you're doing, instead of constantly checking for their response. Your attention isn't fragmented between present activity and anxious monitoring. You're more here, more available, more engaged with what's actually in front of you. When you stop needing your body to feel perfect, you're actually capable of being present with your body as it is, instead of constantly fighting it or wishing it were different. You might notice sensations you'd been too busy resisting to feel. You might discover that even discomfort, when you're not adding resistance to it, is just sensation, not pleasant, but not intolerable either. There's a relief in not needing things to be different. Like you've been carrying tension you didn't know you were carrying, and suddenly, someone helps you set it down. You didn't realize how much energy was going into maintaining all those requirements, monitoring whether they were being met, suffering when they weren't, anxiously protecting the ones that were. Buddhist teaching points to something simple. Suffering comes from resistance to what is. Not from the conditions themselves, but from your relationship to the conditions, from your insistence that they should be other than they are. Cold isn't suffering. Your resistance to cold is suffering. Silence isn't suffering. Your resistance to silence is suffering. Tiredness isn't suffering. Your resistance to tiredness is suffering. The actual experience, without resistance added, is just experience, sometimes pleasant, sometimes unpleasant, but not creating the additional layer of suffering that comes from demanding it be different. When you release requirements, you're not accepting harmful situations or tolerating abuse or becoming passive. You're accepting what already is as what is, while still responding to it appropriately. If something's cold and you want warmth, you get a sweater that's responding, not resisting. If someone treats you poorly, you set boundaries or leave. That's responding, not resisting. The difference is whether you add the suffering of needing reality to be different before you can respond to it. You can act without requiring. You can prefer without needing. You can want things to improve without making your okayness dependent on that improvement happening. You can work toward better circumstances while being fundamentally okay with current circumstances. This isn't contradiction, it's freedom. What remains when you stop requiring so much is a simple, quiet okayness that doesn't depend on conditions aligning perfectly. Not ecstatic joy every moment, not constant happiness, just basic okayness that persists underneath whatever's happening. Like Bakula spending 160 years being fundamentally okay regardless of what arose. Not because he forced himself to be okay, not because he pretended difficulties weren't difficult, but because he'd released so many requirements that there was almost nothing reality could present that would disrupt his basic peace. You're not Bakula. You're just someone practicing with one requirement this week, seeing what happens when you release it, discovering whether you can function and even thrive without that particular condition being met. And maybe next week, you release another one, and another the week after that, not as a grim project of self-deprivation, but as a gentle discovery of what you actually need versus what you've just become accustomed to needing. Each release is more freedom. Each reduction in requirements is more peace. Each acceptance of what is without needing it different is more okayness available regardless of how conditions unfold. But what about when life really does fall apart? When something genuinely terrible happens? There's a story from the Buddhist texts about a woman named Patakara that carries more grief than most people can imagine, experiencing in an entire lifetime. Patakara had been born into a wealthy family, but she'd fallen in love with a servant in her household, someone her parents would never approve of, someone far below her social status. So she ran away with him, gave up her comfortable life, and built something simple together, far from her family's disapproval. She became pregnant, and as the pregnancy advanced, she felt increasingly afraid. She wanted to be near her mother for the birth, wanted the safety of her childhood home, wanted to mend the relationship she'd broken when she'd left. She asked her husband if they could return, just for the birth, just to reconnect with her family. He kept refusing, worried about how they'd be received, not wanting to face her family's judgment. But as labor began, as the contractions started, Patakara knew she couldn't wait any longer. She started walking toward her parents' home alone, her husband following reluctantly behind her. Labor progressed faster than either of them expected. They didn't make it to her parents' home. She gave birth on the roadside, her husband helping as best he could, both of them terrified, both doing what needed to be done. They decided to turn back to their own home. The baby was here now. The journey had become too dangerous. Patakara recovered enough to try again a few years later when she became pregnant with their second child. Same longing to reconnect with family. Same hope that maybe enough time had passed that her parents would forgive and welcome them. This time her husband agreed to go with her. They had one child already, another on the way. Maybe that would soften her parents' hearts. They began the journey, their young son walking between them. Midway there, a storm hit. Not just rain, but a violent storm, the kind that turns roads to rivers and makes shelter essential. Her husband left her and their son under a makeshift shelter while he went to find materials to build something more substantial. He didn't come back. Patakara waited as the storm raged, her son huddled against her, her pregnant body trying to protect them both from the wind and rain. She waited through the night, through the next morning, waited until waiting became its own kind of knowing. Finally, she left the shelter, holding her son's hand, searching for her husband. She found him not far away, struck by lightning, his body already cold. She didn't have time to grieve. She had a living son to protect, and labor pains were beginning again. She gave birth there, beside her dead husband, in the aftermath of the storm, completely alone with 2 children now, and no idea what to do next, except keep moving toward her parents' home. She walked carrying her newborn, her older son walking beside her, both of them exhausted, both of them traumatized, until they came to a river, swollen from the storm. The current was strong, the water high, and she knew she couldn't carry both children across safely at once. She left her older son on the bank, carried the newborn across first, laid the infant safely on the far side, and turned back to get her older son. From the middle of the river, she saw it happen. A hawk circling overhead, diving down toward her newborn, lying alone on the bank. She screamed, trying to scare it away, waving her arms frantically. Her older son, hearing her screaming, thinking she was calling him, stepped into the river to come to her. The current took him immediately. She watched him swept away, his small body pulled under, gone before she could reach him. She made it to the far bank just in time to see the hawk flying away with her newborn. Both children gone, both children dead, her husband dead. Everything, everyone she loved, gone in less than 2 days. She kept walking. What else could she do? She kept moving toward her parents' home, empty-armed now, empty-hearted, moving, because moving was the only thing her body knew how to do when her mind couldn't comprehend what had just happened. When she finally reached her parents' village, she asked someone about her family. The person looked at her with pity and said, "You don't know? Last night's storm collapsed their house. Your parents died. Your brother died. They're burning the bodies now. You can see the smoke from here." Patakara broke. She went mad with grief, wandering the streets, tearing off her clothes, not knowing who she was anymore, or where she was, or what anything meant when everyone she'd ever loved was dead, all of them dead. all in the space of 2 days. People avoided her, thinking her possessed or dangerous. This wild woman raving about loss, too great to be believed. She wandered for days, maybe weeks, completely lost in grief that had no bottom, no edges, no end. Until she happened to wander near a place where the Buddha was teaching. The Buddha saw her approaching, saw her state, and did something unexpected. Instead of turning away like everyone else had, he spoke directly to her. "Sister, regain your mindfulness." Something in his voice reached through the fog of her grief. She stopped, looked at him, and suddenly became aware of herself, naked, raving, covered in dirt, completely undone. Someone gave her a robe, and she sat down, sobbing, the full weight of her losses hitting her now that she was conscious again. She told him everything: husband, children, parents, brother, all gone, all dead, all lost in 2 days of horror that seemed designed specifically to destroy her. "How can I bear this?" she asked through her tears. "How can anyone bear this?" The Buddha didn't offer comfort in the way people usually do. He didn't say everything happens for a reason, or they're in a better place, or any of the things people say when they don't know what to say. He said, throughout all time, the tears you've shed for loved ones who've died would be greater than the water in all the oceans. This isn't the first time you've lost people you love, and it won't be the last. Then he said, everything that arises passes away. Your husband, your children, your parents, they arose in your life and passed away. Your grief arose, and it too will pass. This is the nature of all conditioned things. He wasn't minimizing her loss. He wasn't telling her not to grieve. He was showing her that her grief, overwhelming as it was, would eventually pass, not because she forced it to, but because that's what all experiences do. Patakara began to practice. Not to escape her grief, not to bypass her pain, but to be present with it, without being destroyed by it. She sat with her losses, let herself feel the full weight of what had happened. But she also started noticing that grief moved in waves. It arose, peaked, subsided, arose again. It wasn't one solid, immovable thing, and she could be present with it without being consumed by it. Over time, Patakara achieved what the Buddhist texts call enlightenment. Not because she stopped feeling pain, but because she'd discovered something unshakable underneath all the pain, a capacity to be present with whatever arose without being destroyed by it. She became a teacher herself, particularly for women who'd experienced loss. She could sit with their grief without trying to fix it, because she knew from direct experience that the deepest pain doesn't destroy you if you can stay present with it instead of being swept away by it. This is what Buddhist practice is actually for. Not for making your life comfortable, or ensuring nothing bad happens. It's for building something in you that can't be shaken even when everything else is shaking, even when your entire life falls apart, even when you face losses that seem unbearable. Because life will fall apart sometimes. Not in most people's lives will it fall apart the way it did for Patakara. Her story is extreme, devastating, the kind of accumulated loss that seems almost impossible. But everyone faces their own version of things crumbling. You get sick, not just a cold, but something serious, something that changes your body permanently. Your relationship ends in betrayal or bitterness, or simply the slow death of connection that leaves you more alone than you ever expected to be. Someone you love dies, and the hole they leave is so big, you can't imagine how you'll ever live around it. The economy collapses, and the security you built over decades disappears. Your career dead ends or becomes obsolete, and you have to start over when starting over feels impossible. Your body ages in ways that frighten you, losing strength and sharpness and the easy functioning you took for granted. Your dreams for your life become clearly unreachable, and you have to grieve who you thought you'd become. The practice isn't about preventing these things. It can't. It's about whether you can maintain some core of stability when everything else is chaos, whether you can still choose your response when circumstances are overwhelming. This isn't about pretending it doesn't hurt. Patakara's grief was real, devastating, appropriate to what she'd lost. The practice didn't make her stop feeling it. It gave her a way to be with it that didn't add additional layers of suffering on top of unavoidable pain. Can you feel devastating loss without also demanding that reality be different? Can you experience physical pain without adding the suffering of resenting your body for hurting? Can you watch your dreams die without adding the suffering of believing you're a failure? Can you face genuine catastrophe while still maintaining some capacity to respond rather than just react? That's what the practice builds toward. Not immunity from difficulty, but a capacity to be present with difficulty without being destroyed by it. Think of a tree in a storm. The tree with shallow roots gets torn up, thrown down, destroyed by winds. It has no way to withstand. But the tree with deep roots bends in the storm, sometimes dramatically, sometimes frighteningly far, but it doesn't break. The roots hold it steady, even while everything above ground is being whipped around by forces beyond its control. The practice is growing roots. Not roots in circumstances. Those will always shift. Not roots in other people. They'll change, leave, die. Not roots in your body. It will age, sicken, fail, eventually. Roots in something deeper, something that remains stable, regardless of the storm raging above ground. Every time you sit in meditation, even when you don't feel like it, you're growing roots. Every time you stay present with discomfort, Instead of immediately escaping it, you're growing roots. Every time you release a demand that reality be different, you're growing roots. Every time you choose response over reaction, you're growing roots. Small moments, repeated consistently, building something that won't be visible until the storm comes, and you discover you can bend without breaking. This isn't about becoming numb or detached or pretending you don't care. Patakara cared deeply. The depth of her grief proved how much she'd loved. But she found a way to care without being destroyed by loss, to love without being demolished when love ended, to feel everything without being consumed by feeling. That's what's possible when you build deep enough roots. Not that you won't feel pain. You will, sometimes unbearably. But underneath the pain, there's something steady, something that remains okay, even when nothing feels okay, something that can't be shaken, no matter what shakes everything else. And building this requires understanding one final truth about time. Everything you're experiencing right now will end. The discomfort you're feeling, it will end. The joy you're experiencing, it will end. The relationship you're in, it will end, either through change or through death. The body you're inhabiting, it will end. The thoughts moving through your mind right now, they're already ending, already being replaced by new thoughts, which will also end. Everything composed will eventually come apart. Everything built will eventually crumble. Everything that arises will eventually pass away. This is not pessimism or depression. This is just what happens to everything that exists in time. And somehow, understanding this deeply is one of the most liberating truths you can realize. Most people hear about impermanence and immediately feel depressed by it. You're telling me nothing lasts? Everything I love will end? Everything I build will be destroyed? How is that supposed to help? But watch what actually happens when you really understand impermanence, when you feel it in your bones rather than just thinking about it as a concept. You're in a difficult situation. Maybe you're heartbroken. Maybe you're struggling financially. Maybe you're dealing with physical pain that seems endless. The suffering feels permanent, like this is just your life now, like there's no end in sight. But impermanence means this won't last. Not because you're going to fix it or escape it, but because nothing lasts. This situation will change, because change is what everything does. That's not false hope. It's just reality. Bad situations genuinely don't last, not because the universe is fair, but because impermanence applies to everything equally, including suffering. You're in a wonderful situation. Maybe you're in love. Maybe you've achieved something you've been working toward. Maybe you're experiencing joy and ease. Impermanence means this won't last either. But instead of that realization making you anxious, it actually lets you be more fully present with it. Because If you know this moment won't last, you can actually be here for it, instead of already worrying about losing it. You can enjoy it completely without needing to make it permanent, can appreciate it fully without grasping it desperately. Impermanence means you can enjoy without grasping and endure without despairing. When something good is happening, you don't need to clutch it, trying to make it stay. You can just be present with it because you understand it's already temporary. The enjoyment becomes fuller, cleaner, not contaminated by anxiety about preservation. When something bad is happening, you don't need to despair, as if this is your permanent reality. You can endure it because you understand it's already changing, already in the process of becoming something else. The suffering becomes bearable because you're not adding the suffering of believing it will last forever. Think about physical pain for a moment. When you're in pain and you believe it will never end, the pain becomes unbearable. But if you know it will pass, maybe not today, but eventually, suddenly, the pain becomes something you can be present with. Your relationship to it has completely transformed because you're no longer resisting its permanence. This is why impermanence is comforting rather than depressing, because it means you're never actually stuck. Nothing is ever truly permanent, and the situation that feels unbearable today genuinely won't be the situation forever. There's a story about a wealthy merchant who wanted to build something that would last. He'd made his fortune in trade, spent his life accumulating wealth, and now he wanted to create something permanent, something that would outlast him and prove that his life had mattered. So he decided to build a mansion unlike anything the region had ever seen. He hired the finest architects, the most skilled builders, craftsmen known throughout the land for their excellence. And he insisted on one thing: everything had to be made of teak. Teak was the most durable wood available, dense, resistant to rot, impervious to termites, able to withstand decades of weather without deteriorating. If he built everything from teak, the merchant reasoned, his mansion would stand for centuries, maybe millennia. It would be his legacy, his monument, his proof that something could be built to last forever. The construction took years. Enormous teak beams for the frame, teak planks for the floors, teak panels for the walls, teak tiles for the roof. Every door, every window frame, every railing and staircase and piece of furniture, all teak. The cost was staggering, but the merchant didn't care. He was building permanence. When it was finally complete, the mansion was magnificent. 3 stories of flawless craftsmanship, every surface gleaming with the rich color of aged teak, every joint fitted so perfectly you couldn't slide paper between them. People came from distant cities just to see it, to stand in its grand entrance hall and marvel at what could be built when cost was no concern and perfection was the only standard. The merchant walked through his completed mansion with deep satisfaction. He ran his hands along the teak walls, felt their solidity, their weight, their permanence. "This will last forever," he said to himself. "Long after I'm gone, this will stand, and people will remember that I built something that could not be destroyed." He lived in his mansion for 20 years. 20 years of maintaining it, polishing it, repairing any tiny flaw that appeared. He was vigilant, protective, determined that nothing would damage his creation. But in the 21st year, he noticed something. A slight discoloration on one of the beams in the main hall. He examined it closely and felt his chest tighten. Tiny holes, barely visible, the telltale sign of powder post beetles that had somehow found a way in, despite teak's famous resistance. He hired specialists immediately, had the beam treated, reinforced, protected. But the next year, he found more beetles in a different part of the structure. Then weather damage on the roof, where decades of sun and rain had finally begun to degrade even teak's resilience. Then foundation, settling that created tiny cracks in walls he'd believed were impervious to time. Each new sign of deterioration disturbed him more deeply than the last. He increased his maintenance efforts, hired more workers, spent more money, trying to prevent the inevitable. But the mansion kept aging, kept showing its mortality, kept proving that even teak couldn't escape time. By his 70th year, the merchant was exhausted. He'd spent 2 decades fighting entropy, 2 decades trying to make permanent what was always temporary, 2 decades increasingly anxious and desperate as his great work slowly, inevitably, came apart. One evening, he sat alone in his magnificent entrance hall, now showing its age, despite his constant efforts, and he finally let himself feel what he'd been avoiding for years. This mansion would not last forever. It was already dying, had been dying since the moment it was completed, was moving steadily toward the same dissolution that awaited everything built, everything composed, everything that existed in time. And in that moment of accepting what he'd been fighting, something unexpected happened. Relief. Not disappointment or defeat, but actual relief. He could finally stop fighting what was always going to happen anyway. He could finally let go of the impossible task of making permanent what was never meant to be permanent. He could finally just appreciate the mansion for what it actually was, beautiful now, functional now, here now, and also temporary, like everything else. He stopped the frantic maintenance, not because he stopped caring, but because he accepted that care couldn't prevent change. He still fixed things when they broke, still kept the structure sound and safe, but he released the desperate need to preserve it exactly as it had been. He let it age naturally, let it show its weathering, let it be what it was in each moment, without demanding it remain what it had been. And somehow, in releasing his grip, he actually enjoyed the mansion more in his final years than he had when he was desperately trying to keep it perfect. He could walk through it with appreciation rather than anxiety, could see its beauty without constantly scanning for signs of decay, could be present with what was rather than worried about what was ending. The mansion still stands today, centuries later, not perfectly preserved as the merchant had intended, but still standing, still beautiful, still useful, despite being obviously aged. It's a landmark now, not because it lasted forever, but because it demonstrates something more valuable. Even what's built to be permanent is temporary, and that temporariness doesn't diminish its value. This is what happens when you understand impermanence, not as a threat, but as simple truth. Since everything changes anyway, you can stop fighting change. Not stop participating in life. Not stop building or creating or caring about things, but stop adding the exhausting layer of resistance to the inevitable. Your body is aging right now. You can fight that, spending enormous energy trying to make your body stay exactly as it was. Or you can accept that aging is what bodies do and care for your body appropriately, without desperate attempts to prevent what cannot be prevented. Your relationship is changing right now. You can fight that, demanding your partner stay exactly who they were when you met them. Or you can accept that people grow and change and be present with the relationship as it actually is today, rather than mourning how it used to be. Your circumstances are shifting right now. You can fight that, clinging desperately to circumstances you enjoy, or resisting bitterly circumstances you don't. Or you can flow with change instead of against it, responding to what's actually present. Think of being in a river. You can fight the current, exhaust yourself swimming upstream, spend all your energy trying to stay exactly where you were. Or you can swim with the current, working with the flow rather than against it, moving in the direction everything's moving anyway, but with some agency about how you navigate that movement. This doesn't mean passive acceptance of everything. You still choose your responses, still act according to your values, still work to improve situations that can be improved. But you do all of that while understanding that everything is already in motion, already changing, already moving toward different forms, regardless of how tightly you try to hold things in place. Notice what's already changing right now in your direct experience. Your breath. Every breath arises, exists for a moment, and passes away. Your thoughts, each one appears, hangs in awareness briefly, and disappears, to be replaced by another. Sensations in your body. That itch comes and goes. That ache shifts and changes. That feeling of warmth or coolness fluctuates constantly. Everything in your immediate experience is already in constant motion, already demonstrating impermanence directly. When you really see this, not think about it, but actually see it happening moment by moment, you start to trust the motion. You trust that this difficult moment will pass because you see everything passing. You trust that you can let go of this good moment without losing everything because you see that holding on was never an option anyway. You trust that you can be present with whatever's here, because what's here is always temporary, always already changing into something else. This is the comforting truth of impermanence. You're never stuck. Whatever is happening right now is already becoming something different. Everything is fluid, everything is temporary, and that temporariness means you're never trapped in any particular state, no matter how permanent it feels. And when you understand this in your bones, when you feel it directly, rather than just thinking about it, something shifts in how you meet each moment. You can be here more fully because you're not trying to make here last forever. You can feel what you're feeling more completely because you know feelings are temporary. You can experience both joy and pain without adding the suffering of trying to make one stay and the other leave. Everything changes, including this moment, including your suffering, including your joy. It's all already moving, already temporary, already in the process of becoming something else. And somehow, that's not depressing. It's deeply liberating. Because it means nothing is ever truly stuck, and the situation that feels unbearable today genuinely won't be the situation forever. So what does all this actually build? Where does this path lead? Everything you've been hearing points to one thing. Not happiness that requires perfect circumstances. Not peace that depends on everything going your way. Not well-being that only exists when conditions align. But peace that remains regardless of circumstances. Happiness that doesn't require specific conditions to be met. Well-being that's available, whether your life is going smoothly or falling apart. This isn't because you stop caring about circumstances or become numb to difficulty. It's because you've found something stable underneath all the changing conditions, a fundamental okayness that doesn't depend on anything external being a particular way. This is the real treasure. Not techniques or practices or spiritual achievements, but the simple capacity to be okay regardless of what's happening. And you can begin right now, wherever you are. This breath, this choice, this moment. Take back your steering wheel. Not dramatically, not all at once, just gently. One choice at a time, one released demand at a time, one moment of presence at a time. You're not alone in this. Millions have walked this path before you. Millions are walking it now. The Buddha's final words to his students were simple. Be a lamp unto yourself. Don't look outside for what can only be found within. You take control of your mind. You create your peace. You discover what remains when you stop demanding so much from each moment. May you find the peace that nothing can disturb. May you discover the freedom that comes from needing less. May you know the relief of finally putting down what you were never meant to carry. The path is here. You're already on it. Just keep walking